Welcome to The Impossible, where we empower others to face the impossible, inspire them to be impossible, and motivate them to do the impossible. I'm Matt, and I'm here with a bonus episode for you guys tonight. I wanted to come on here and talk about some things that are not easy, some things that we don't always talk about, but they are the truths of reality, and they're things that we have to face. So many things on here that we discuss with so many of our impossible guests are not easy to discuss. They're not easy for me and Austin to hear. They're not easy for our guests to relive with every minute detail, but they are necessary. And more than necessary, they are so important. Because the only way to find healing, to find growth, to find meaning, and to create purpose for these stories and these events is to relive them, to extract the lessons, the strength you built from those experiences, and to give those to others battling through the same situation today. There's so much hurt, there's so much pain, there's so much suffering in this world. But what's greater, what's stronger than that is how much good there is. And we're trying to be a big part of that good and bringing this positive, strengthening, motivating message to everyone facing the impossible in their lives today, so that they may be able to face these circumstances. They can overcome them. They can build themselves into someone who is capable of doing these impossible things. And through that process, they will find healing, they will find growth, and they will find a potential for themselves so far beyond anything they could have imagined. I was thinking a lot about it this last week, and I was thinking a lot about it today during my training session. And I realized every single week I go to the gym, Monsters Bent Barbell, with so many other incredibly strong people. And we put ourselves in situations that could kill us. We get underneath weight that could crush us in an instant. We fight against injury, we fight against setback, we fight against health conditions, we fight against challenges that should break so many of us. Yet every week, some of us every day, we show up to fight those battles, to find those challenges, to overcome them, and ultimately to gain strength of mind, body, and spirit. And in this particular training cycle, I've had 2 instances now where I was squatting on my prosthetic leg with weight I never thought I would even remotely touch. And I've had 2 instances where I've almost fallen under that weight. And those moments aren't lost on me. They're not something I take lightly. If you've ever been someone who's been under that kind of crushing weight, you know that it's not something that you just shrug off and don't think about. Fortunately, I train at what is the best gym in the world with the best humans in the world. And each time this has happened, there's been someone there to catch me, to catch the weight, to make sure I'm safe, make sure I'm recovered, and help me through those moments. And to them, I can never thank them enough. But it got me thinking, why do we show up to do this every day, every week? Why do we put ourselves in these situations that we know could cause permanent injury or even ultimately crush us? Because it's not what most people, I think, would call smart. It's not promoting of necessarily long-term health or wellness as a lot of people would consider it. It's putting ourselves in these situations where they certainly could be life-threatening situations, and we have to go into survival mode. We have to survive. We have to fight against the challenge, and we have to come out stronger and better. But why do we do this? Why do I do this? Why have I chosen to chase these things ever since my cancer diagnosis? Spent a lot of time thinking about it this week, meditating on it, reviewing it in my brain, listening to other perspectives on it. I talk to Clayton, the gym owner, about it all the time. So many people call us crazy. They say they can't watch our videos. They say, why would you ever do that to yourself? Why would you ever push yourself to that level? Why would you put yourself in that situation? And here's the answer. We are programmed to survive. We are programmed to overcome. We are programmed to adapt, and me specifically, Austin and I are programmed to face the impossible, to become impossible in that circumstance, ultimately doing the impossible. This programming did not come easy. It did not come lightly. And it did not come without a great amount of pain and suffering. Yet, on the other side of it, there's a strength I never would have dreamed I would have known. I've taken a body that should have been completely broken, a body that should not have been able to sustain life, and I've achieved impossible things with it. That all started with building an impossible mind and an impossible spirit. And even that was not something I chose initially. Moreover, it was a circumstance that I was placed in. A life-threatening circumstance. A circumstance where I had to survive and thrive or I would die. It was a circumstance where I had to choose. I had to make a choice that I did not want to make. Nobody ever does. But in those moments, I had no option. We're going to dive in and explain all of that. Go over how this all came to be. How we got to this point where we are programmed to survive, programmed to thrive, programmed to crave challenge so we can overcome it. And I know so many of you will understand this perspective perfectly in your hearts. And I know there's others that this still won't make sense to, and that's okay. I don't know if everyone is meant to chase life in this manner, but I do know everyone has the potential for it. When I was 18 years old, in my senior year of high school, a doctor looked me in the eyes, and in the span of 30 seconds, he told me, "You have cancer. You're going to get your leg cut off. You're not going to school next year. You're going to put your plans for life, your dreams and your hopes and your aspirations, all of that is on hold while you go through 9 months of brutal, intensive chemotherapy. It was the first time I'd ever been confronted with my own mortality. And it wasn't so much a confrontation as it was a crushing weight that landed on me and broke my soul in an instant. You hear so many of our guests talk about the numbness that comes with something like this. It's like your body, your mind, your spirit can't even process it. So you go into survival mode. You shut it off. You bury it down deep. And you try to pretend that it's not real. It's a natural human thing to do. And I remember those days and those weeks after this diagnosis, the uncertainty, the fear, the pain of not knowing what lay ahead of me very nearly crushed me. You see, it was that moment where my whole perspective on life shifted. Everything changed. In those days and weeks, I realized I was facing something of which I was not capable of overcoming. The person I had built to that point in my life was not capable of facing this circumstance and overcoming it. I couldn't even accept it. But one night, as I was thinking and studying it and trying to come with any sort of terms with the situation, I realized, you know what? I don't have to beat this. The person I am right now, he's not the person that's going to overcome this. He's not the person that's going to beat this. He's not the person that even has to face this. But you know what? I can create that person. I can create someone who can face this awful challenge, this brutal diagnosis. I can create him over time, and I can build him up to be such a person that he becomes an impossible version of myself, somebody who never should have or would have existed otherwise. That man could face this, and he can overcome it. So in that moment, laying in my bed as an 18-year-old kid just diagnosed with cancer, I made the decision that I wasn't going to worry about the cancer diagnosis. I wasn't going to worry about having to make it through the chemotherapy, make it through the amputation, or make it through anything else that came along with it. All I was going to focus on was building the individual who could. And that brought me a greater source of power than I could have ever known. Because in that moment, I accepted everything I had control over and was able to let go of everything I did not. And in doing so, my mission became simple, my vision became clear, and I was able to take that first step forward in the face of this diagnosis, in the face of this impossible. I had no idea what the next 9 months would hold, and if I did, I probably would have never started down this journey. My body really did not like chemo. It rejected it in every form, in every dose, like the toxin that it is. It's a life-saving toxin, but a toxin nonetheless. And I don't talk a lot about my experiences during that time on here. I think in large part because I've worked so hard to cultivate such a positive mindset in every situation. I've made that my default programming as a means of putting myself farther ahead when a challenge does arise. It's a very useful programming and something I've been very proud to have instilled within myself and worked so hard to build up. But I think sometimes we have to be able to go back to those times, to relive them and to recognize them for what they were. Because it gives so much more meaning and purpose to when you overcome those challenges. And for me, I remember waking up from surgery just a week after that diagnosis, and I was already receiving chemotherapy. I never had that moment of sitting in the chair, waiting for it to get hooked up, watching it go into my vein. No, they started my chemotherapy in the middle of surgery. As soon as that port was in my body, that chemo was hung and running. I woke up to see that bag dripping into my bloodstream. But in that moment, I went back to that mission that I had built for myself. I wasn't going to worry about this. I'm only worried about building the person who can overcome this. And that all started internally. It started in my mind and in my spirit. Started with building a positive outlook on this. Realizing that people were watching me on this journey. They were watching to see how I would react in the face of such circumstances. And they would have understood. They would have understood so perfectly if I had broken down and given in to it. But I also knew that I could use that situation to show people something more. To show them that you don't have to let these challenges in life crush you and break you. You can use them to build a stronger version of yourself. You can use them to create an impossible version of yourself. You can use them to create someone who never would have existed otherwise. And in that way, it will make you grateful for having faced that challenge. My effects from chemo were almost instant. I would immediately get out of breath from any level of activity. I was on crutches during this time because my leg was too fragile to support my own weight, and if it broke, it would send cancer cells coursing throughout my body, infecting every organ that I had and killing me. So I crutched on, up the stairs, through the hallways of school, out of breath, wheezing, with blurry vision. I developed immediate heartburn, like I'd never experienced before. It would keep me awake at night. I would cough and spit, have trouble digesting food. I developed mouth sores that would bleed internally, all the way through my GI tract. I would have blood in my mouth. I would be in so much pain on my throat that I lost the ability to eat and drink between chemotherapy sessions, to the point that I would have to be rushed to the ER just to get pumped with IV fluids because I could no longer hydrate myself. The red blood cells in my body that carried oxygen through my veins and to my organs and cells depleted so much that there were times I couldn't even sit up without passing out. I would be rushed to the hospital in sepsis multiple times to receive IV antibiotics, be placed in the ICU for weeks on end, being hooked up to BiPAP machines, CPAP machines, ventilators, anything to keep my body alive. In fact, the chemotherapy was so brutal, so awful, that I tell people, and I actually mean this, even today, I mean this, the amputation was the best part of 2013 for me. Getting my leg cut off was the best part of that year. Because for a moment, for a couple weeks, I got to be off of chemotherapy. It was that bad. And I think back to those times and how when I came off of the chemotherapy, immediately my body started to recover. I actually started to feel better again for the first time in months, because what chemo does is it treats your body like a sickness. Every day you feel worse. Every day you feel more sick. And every time you have a good day right before another infusion, you get that next infusion and it breaks you down even further. And it's this endless cycle of waking up feeling worse and worse every day. And when you're in that moment, there's no hope in sight. There's no light at the end of the tunnel saying, I'm going to get out of this, I'm going to recover. It's only survival for that week, that day, that minute, that instant in time. You're just focusing on survival. The urge to survive, the instinct to survive, is one of the most powerful things we have as humans. And when you're put in a position, whether it's cancer or disease or addiction or whatever it may be, where you become programmed to survive, you become used to your only mission in life being to survive, that's something you can't let go of. It opens up a whole new world of humanity for you, in good ways and in bad. And that's what happened to me. After that amputation, I was almost immediately placed back on chemotherapy before my amputation had even healed. And because of that, even to this day, it has never properly healed. I have a separation in the surgical site that, by all medical understanding, should cause me lots of problems, but fortunately, it doesn't, at least not in a way that I'm aware of. Going back on that toxic medication was one of the hardest things I've ever faced in life. Even though I'd worked so hard to build this person who could overcome this challenge, and I'd stayed so positive with such a strong spirit, going back on that medication nearly broke me. Many times. There were times where I would wake up in the morning and have no will to even get out of bed, let alone the strength or energy to do so. There were times where I would just sit on my bed, weeping in endless tears, telling my mom and my dad that I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't go on anymore. I fell into a deep depression, like my body had just switched off any propensity for emotion, because I couldn't take it anymore. There are things out there that are so much worse than death. It got to the point where between every single chemo treatment, I was being rushed back to the hospital in sepsis because it would just totally obliterate my immune system, and I would immediately contract an infection that my body could no longer fight. I got to the point where I developed a deep intuition, a strong feeling that if I were to continue, something would go gravely wrong. I got this strong feeling, this sixth sense, that my body could not take anymore, that the next treatment would kill me. I gathered all my doctors, my whole healthcare team into the room right before that last treatment, and I told them everything I felt and said, I don't think I can handle another round. And to their credit, they sat for hours and listened to me and discussed, and we talked about the pros and the cons, but the cancer I had was a very aggressive pediatric cancer, to the point that anybody I've ever known that has had a recurrence of this cancer has died. If you don't kill it the first time, it will kill you. That's what the doctors knew. They knew that I was actually fortunate enough to be in a treatable situation where if they gave the right medications and the right doses and did the right surgeries, they could cure me of this vicious disease. But if we did not totally eradicate it, I would not survive. And so ultimately, I made the decision to continue. I got that final dose of chemotherapy despite my intuition, and 3 days later, I was life-flighted to the hospital. Far sicker than I had ever been, unbeknownst to me at the time. My blood pressure had dropped to the 50s over 20s, so low that I no longer had enough oxygen going to my brain to fuel my own vision. I lost my vision. I started losing my ability to hear. I was barely coherent. But I was in so much pain. It was the only thing that I could interpret, the only sensation I was aware of. An ambulance was fortunately nearby, as it usually takes 45 minutes for it to get to my house. They diverted the route they were on, came to get me, rushed me to a local hospital, where that doctor tried to intervene and was unable to, and I was life-flighted to the hospital where I was treated, the hospital that would ultimately save my life. I remember that helicopter ride being one of the longest periods of wait I've ever endured. For what seemed like days, I laid in that helicopter with the paramedic continuing to pump medications into me at a loss of what even to do. And I remember landing on that rooftop, the door opening, and a whole medical team already up there waiting for me. And I felt the cool winter air on my face for what would be the last time for months. I was rushed down to the bottom floor of the 14-story building, put in a trauma room in the emergency department, a room so well equipped they can even perform surgery in it. A whole team exploded around me. Doctors, nurses, pharmacists, oncologists, emergency medicine physicians, infectious disease providers. It was chaos like I'd never seen. Yet they were all in perfect order. I kept feeling points of pain as they tried to access me with IV needles, but my blood pressure had continued to drop to the point that they could not even get IV access on me. The last number I remember seeing on the screen was 26/10. I didn't know you could be alive with those numbers. I faintly heard my mom yell my name out to tell me that she was there. She had arrived at the hospital, and I looked over to see one of my oncologist's faces, a man who was one of the happiest, most cheerful, energetic, motivating men that I had ever known to that point. Yet in this moment, his face was stark white, and the only thing on it was fear. And that was the last thing I saw as I slipped into darkness. What I experienced next is something that very few people on this planet even know about. Something I've never spoken about publicly, and I may never do so. I was in what's called multi-system organ failure. My body's organs were shutting down one by one. My kidneys, then my liver, and next my heart and my lungs. In a moment of pure miracle, they were able to connect me to a machine called ECMO. A machine that's one step even beyond a ventilator, where it serves as an artificial set of heart and lungs. It pumps the blood out of your body, oxygenates it, filters it, and pumps it back in. It was the only thing that kept me alive. Back when I was on this machine, only 50% of the people who went on it ever came off of it alive. And an even smaller percentage of those people regained any level of mental or physical function. This machine was keeping me alive, but it was not healing me. Despite every method the doctors knew, my blood pressure kept dropping. Lower and lower, resisting every single medication they had in their arsenal to revive it. And just when everyone had given up, just when my parents had been told to prepare for their son's death, one doctor did the impossible. She found an experimental treatment from the most unlikely drug you would ever imagine that maybe had some chance of helping. At that point, I was in a position where I could not get any worse. So she approved it with my parents, appealed to the hospital's board, and got it approved for compassionate care. The pharmacy ordered, compounded this drug, and one of the most amazing nurses I've ever had the privilege to know administered this drug. Within days, I was back to a healthy blood pressure. I was paralyzed on a table in a medically induced coma for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, I did not have a muscle twitch, and my whole body atrophied. During this time, they were trying to figure out, why did all of this happen? What was the root cause? What was going on within my body? And nobody knew. But that wasn't even at the forefront yet. The forefront was just trying to keep me alive, to hopefully get me off of this machine and allow me to be stable enough to run more scans and testing. For 2 weeks in this reality's time, I lay there, totally still, appearing as if I was a carcass. Yet, what I was facing internally was so much worse. Doctors call them hallucinations. Sundowner syndrome, they call it, when your body loses its circadian rhythm and you no longer have the ability to internally detect when it's day versus when it's night. Maybe they're right. All I know is those visions, those hallucinations as they call them, were more real, more vivid, more awful, more terrible than anything I've ever experienced. You see, it was 2 weeks that I laid on that table, but in my mind, I was gone for years, in a state of constant and unimaginable suffering. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to talk about that publicly. It's hard enough to relive it with my most trusted loved ones. The doctors told my family I would never remember any of this, but it's still burned into my brain, just as clear as the day it happened. And I'll never forget one of the happiest days of my life, when I first started to come out of that coma and realized everything I had experienced for what felt like years was not the reality that I knew. I remember opening my eyes, not being able to see even remotely clearly, but at least being somewhat conscious of where I was for the first time in weeks. And I saw my mom and dad off to the side. I can't remember whether I tried to say something or whether I made a noise or what I did, but somehow I got their attention. And they were beside themselves with joy. They were showing me cards and gifts and letters and telling me stories of how much support people had given throughout this time. And I was just so confused. I had no idea what had happened. I had no idea what I'd gone through. I knew what I had seen, what I had experienced internally. But I had no idea what they were talking about. All I knew in that instant was that I had such a strong itch on my nose. But I couldn't even lift my own arm to scratch it. See, like I had talked about, my whole body had atrophied to the point I was no longer capable of lifting my own arm. That is how much strength I had lost. Waking up from a coma is not like it is in the movies. You don't just wake up and realize that you're okay and everything's happy and everything's fine and you're alive. In real life, it comes in waves. And for weeks and months, I slipped in and out of those hallucinations, never sure what was real and what was not. Never sure of if I was alive or if I was not. Never sure if I even understood where I was or who I was anymore. And we've gone into those details of the physical recovery side of that in other episodes. So I'll spare that for now. But I know when I woke up, I had no physical strength, and the therapists that work with me could not get me to pass mental exams designed for a first grader. They'd asked me to name 5 words that start with the letter B, and I could not do it. But there was one thing that saved me, physically and mentally, during this time. Because for the last 9 months, I had never focused on beating cancer. I'd never focused on overcoming amputation. I'd never focused on facing this reality even. My sole focus had been to create the person who could. And I had finally done that. Fortunately, that person, that new spirit and mindset I had built within myself was able to take over because it had already become my default. It refused. He refused to listen to any limitations people placed on him. He knew he would defy all medical standards in his healing and recovery. And when the doctors thought that I may never walk again, and that it would take 6 months of inpatient rehab, if I ever was able to, I took my steps just 2 weeks after that initial wake up from the coma. They were heavily assisted and supported with the aid of many physical and occupational therapists, but they were steps nonetheless. And within 2 months, I walked out of that hospital, assisted by crutches, and felt the cold winter air on my face once again. And I'd love to tell you that I took that mindset and that person that I'd built and charged forward with every fiber of my being into life after that. I'd love to tell you that I took that relentless pursuit and that spirit of facing the impossible, being impossible, and doing the impossible, and applied that to every area of my life henceforth. But that was not the path that I followed. You see, Like I said earlier, I had become someone who was programmed to survive, who was programmed to be in a situation where every single day my purpose was to live, to survive every moment, to fight back against death itself. And when you live through that situation, and when that becomes your purpose for so long, it's very hard to step back into normal life. It's impossible to find the same level of meaning, the same level of significance in school, in work, even in friendships and relationships. And I had no idea how lost I was. Because all of a sudden, I had nothing to fight against. Nothing to survive against. I created those situations for myself subconsciously. Through alcohol and food and negative thought and negative people, I subconsciously chased situations that broke me down. Even though I'd been so fortunate to walk out with my own life, I was no longer someone who could survive without something to survive against. And so I found things to survive against, because otherwise I had no meaning and no purpose for my life. And I would just fall back into that darkness, back into the haunting of those visions and those hallucinations that to this day have never left me. Yet that person I had created, he was still there inside of me. He still had that relentless pursuit, that indomitable spirit, that impossible mindset that could carry him through any situation. Yeah, he was chasing all of the wrong things in life, but he was chasing those things with the same spirit. And one day, that man got the idea to start running. For no particular reason, with no particular motivation. He had the remembrance that when I came home from being in that hospital for months on end, I made a promise to myself that someday I would run a half marathon. Again, for no particular reason other than that it just seemed like something that should be impossible for me to do. And after 4 years of living in darkness, chasing any means of survival, creating challenge for myself through such negative means, I started running. And in a few months, I trained up and somehow crossed the finish line of the Columbus Half Marathon. And I broke down at that finish line. Because for the first time, and I didn't even consciously realize this myself until much later, but for the first time, I had done something impossible. I had struggled against something. I had overcome a challenge. I had survived something that was actually a positive, motivating force in my life. And when I crossed that finish line, a switch was turned on for me, and I was able, for maybe the first time ever, to fully realize the bounds of my own potential. And as we've said so many times on this show, when you see that potential in yourself, you see it in everyone around you. It wasn't a straight journey from that moment, but it was the first step that led me on a better path. It was the spark that would ignite the passion and purpose I would create and build for my life since then. It was what led me to running many other races and finding the gym, finding powerlifting. All of a sudden, I found these things that I could survive against on a daily basis, these challenges I could face routinely, just as I was doing before with all of these negative things. I now had these things in my life where I could fuel that need to survive, that need to face challenge, that need to overcome. Yet they were positive things that were building me up and creating a stronger version of myself. And that is why I do what I do. Nearly every day. And I know they mean well, and they have joking spirits and laughs, and I don't let it bother me. But nearly every day someone tells me I'm crazy, and why would I chase the things that I'm chasing? Why would I continue to fight on? Why would I continue to push myself so hard? Why would I continue to face these odds, to face injury, to face death, to face so many things? Why would I continue to risk it all? And it's because I have no fear of dying. I've already done that. My greatest fear, my greatest motivation is that I would die without ever living. I chase life at its highest potential, its highest form. I chase all of the highs and the lows and the experiences of overcoming and achieving things that should never have been possible for me. Of building myself into a better, more competent, more capable, stronger human being, someone that never should have existed given the circumstances I had faced. And so much more than that. I realized that I could give that gift to others. Watching kids who have battled cancer, who have been programmed to survive and overcome challenge, watching them cross finish lines of races they never thought they'd compete in, watching that light come on in their eyes, and knowing they're going to be okay in life because they've been able to see the strength and potential that they've gained from all of those horrible things they've had to experience. That gives me more meaning, more purpose, more life than any amount of longevity could ever provide. And now, having the gift of my daughter and my wife and our family, and knowing that I can instill those same things in her so that she can charge forward in her life with whatever passions and purpose she creates for herself, and apply the same mindset to do the impossible in those areas, building an impossible version of herself to become someone who never should have been able to exist. That is the highest honor of my life. That is why I do what I do. That is why I go back to the gym every week. That is why I strap that running blade on despite any amount of pain I'm feeling. That is why I put myself under weight that could crush me, so I can have the opportunity to fight against it, to become someone stronger, to become someone impossible, and be able to give that person to others. And this path, this journey, it may not be for everyone, and that's okay. But it is for the ones who have faced the impossible in their life. And what I can tell you is it's okay if people think you're crazy. It's okay if people think you're risking it all. It's okay if people don't understand you. You have the opportunity to take that impossible, whatever it is in your life. You have the opportunity to make it your life's mission to build someone who is capable of overcoming that challenge, and not just overcoming it, but building it into something that has only made you stronger, only made you better. And most of all, you have the opportunity to give that person to those who are suffering the same circumstance today. I want to thank each and every one of you who have been a part of this journey, a part of this mission, this vision, this message we have at Impossible Performance. This is why Austin and I chase everything we do with such intensity, such passion, and such purpose, because it is our life. For us, the impossible is the highest form of living. We've already faced death. We've already looked it in the eyes, felt its touch, felt its grasp, felt its embrace. And we know, because of that, the death is not something to be feared, because life is something to be chased, something to be pursued with the highest level of passion and purpose and love that you possibly can. So if you ever start to question in your own life why you do what you do, why you chase what you chase, why you love what you love, remember that it's because you're chasing life. And you're pursuing the impossible. Thank you for listening. And as always, be impossible.